In 1989, a man was sentenced to death. Not for a crime, for writing a novel. He hadn't even finished reading the sentence before he was underground, living under a fake name surrounded by bodyguards. That sentence is still active today. Books are not harmless. Some of them terrified governments, corporations, and religious institutions so completely that they were burned, banned, and in some cases, their authors were killed. These are the 10. And once you understand exactly which passages they were afraid of, you'll understand why. The Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, 23 pages, suppressed by more governments than almost any other document in history. The explosive part was the opening line. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. That single sentence dismantled the justification for every existing government simultaneously. It told workers they owed no loyalty to their nation, that a factory worker in Germany had more in common with a factory worker in England than with the German factory owner. It ended with a direct instruction: proletarians of all countries, unite. Tsarist Russia restricted and suppressed it before the Soviet Union even existed. Nazi Germany burned it. Franco's Spain outlawed it. McCarthy-era America pulled it from government-run library shelves. Regimes across a century, with nothing else in common, agreed on one thing: this pamphlet should not reach ordinary people. Not because the argument was wrong, because it might be believed. The suppression became the advertising. Every attempt to bury it made it more widely read than it would have been otherwise. The Jungle, Upton, Sinclair, 1906. The president ordered a government investigation within weeks of publication. The investigation confirmed most of what was in it: diseased cattle processed and sold as sound meat, spoiled product dosed with chemicals to mask the smell, workers losing fingers to machinery, tuberculosis spreading through the workforce unchecked. Sinclair had gone undercover for 7 weeks on the floor. He had watched it happen. He also wrote about workers falling into rendering vats and being processed with the animals. The government's own investigation could not confirm that specific claim. It remains disputed. But everything else they verified. The Neil Reynolds report backed the core of the book. The Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act both passed within the year. But Sinclair's real purpose had been the workers, the injury, the disease, the children working in dangerous conditions. None of those chapters produced legislation. The country that couldn't be moved by the suffering of workers was galvanized by the idea that their sausage might contain a dead man. Sinclair understood precisely what that said about the system he was trying to expose. Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, 1962. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring alone, working through the cancer that would kill her less than 2 years after publication. She knew what the industry would do. She documented everything anyway. Monsanto published a parody within months of publication. Ezra Taft Benson, a former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, privately wrote to President Eisenhower that she was probably a communist. She died in April 1964, before the industry's campaign against her was fully discredited. The chapters that caused the panic. Chapter 1. A Fable for Tomorrow painted a fictional American town where all wildlife had gone silent, where children died and livestock collapsed. It was the opening chapter that set the tone Monsanto tried to parody. Chapter 3. Elixirs of Death explained in plain language how pesticides entered the human body and accumulated in fatty tissue, naming the products and the companies. Chapter 8. And No Birds Sing documented the collapse of bird populations following DDT spraying, using field reports and ornithologist surveys. No projections, no models. Direct observation with names and locations. The industry attacked Carson personally, not scientifically. Kennedy's independent scientific investigation confirmed the book's core claims. One journalist later described the EPA, established in 1970, as the extended shadow of Silent Spring. Lady Chatterley's Lover, D.H. Lawrence, 1928. Banned in the UK for 32 years, suppressed in the US for over 30. The official reason was obscenity. The book contained explicit sexual descriptions, used words that had never appeared in mainstream published fiction, and depicted a sexual relationship between a woman of the upper class and a man who worked for her. Any one of those things alone might have been tolerated. All three together were considered unpublishable. The explicit passages were deliberate. An aristocratic woman and her working-class gamekeeper, written with full physical honesty, no euphemism, no shame. Lawrence's point was that physical equality between two people was not a crime. The 1960 obscenity trial made the real fear visible. The prosecutor asked the jury, "Is it a book that you would even wish your wife or servants to read?" The jury laughed. That question, your servants, told the whole story. This wasn't about sex. It was about who was allowed to be considered equal. Penguin won. The book went on sale days after the verdict. 200,000 copies on the first day. 3 million within 3 months. Barrister Geoffrey Robertson later called it the jury verdict, with the deepest social impact in British legal history. Lolita, Vladimir Nabokov, 1955. This is the only book on this list where the controversy has never been settled. Not when it was written, not when it was banned, not today. 4 publishers refused it before a small press in Paris finally took it. Its narrator is a PDF file, written as eloquent, charming, and completely convinced of his own innocence. The problem wasn't just the subject matter, it was the prose. Humbert's descriptions of his abuse of his 12-year-old stepdaughter are written in some of the most beautiful sentences in 20th century literature. The horror is that the language seduces you before the reality catches up. Readers found themselves swept along by the narration before realizing they'd been given the abuser's perspective, completely uncontested, for 300 pages. There is no corrective voice inside the novel. The reader has to provide it themselves. Banned in France, Austria, Argentina, New Zealand, and Australia. Effectively blocked in the UK through customs seizures until 1959. Simultaneously listed among the greatest novels ever written and one of the most morally unresolved books in existence. Nabokov never gave readers a clear moral position. That argument is still happening today. The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Malcolm X and Alex Haley, 1965 to present, published 9 months after his assassination. The FBI had spent years building a file on him, running to more than 3,600 pages. After he was gone, school boards across the country fought to keep his own words out of classrooms. The passages most consistently targeted in school challenges aren't general anger. They're specific. Malcolm X documented, with names, dates, and mechanisms, exactly how structural racism operated in practice, how redlining worked, how employment discrimination worked, how the political system was designed to absorb protest without changing underlying conditions. He didn't write in abstractions. He wrote in specifics. One of the passages most often cited in removal challenges. I have no mercy or compassion in me for a society that will crush people and then penalize them for not being able to stand up under the weight. School boards have called this anti-American. The book's argument is that the anger is not irrational. It is the documented, traceable result of a system. That is precisely what makes it uncomfortable to leave on a shelf. The Anarchist Cookbook, William Powell, 1971. The author spent the last 4 decades of his life trying to destroy it. The publisher refused because the copyright had never belonged to Powell in the first place. Powell was 19 and furious about the Vietnam War when he wrote it. Functional instructions for making explosives, synthesizing drugs, and building weapons, researched from declassified military documents at the New York Public Library. Lyle Stewart published it in 1971. By the mid-1970s, Powell had converted to Christianity and completely reversed his views. He spent decades writing to the publisher requesting it be pulled. The publisher declined every time. He published a public essay in 2013 calling it dangerous and irresponsible. He died in 2016 still trying. The publisher has continued selling it since. It has been found in the possession of individuals linked to real attacks. Unlike every other book on this list, suppressed by outside forces, this one was suppressed by no one, including the one person who most wanted it gone. Powell was never the threat. The indifference of a publisher to the wishes of its own author was. It is still in print, still selling, still impossible to kill, because no one with the power to kill it ever wanted to. American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis, 1991 to present. Simon & Schuster dropped it 1 month before publication, not because of a government ban. After female employees objected to its content and excerpts leaked to the press, the people whose entire job was deciding which books were publishable looked at this one and said, "Not us, find someone else." The specific passages that caused the walkout were the torture and murder scenes, written in the same flat, precise consumer catalog prose narrator Patrick Bateman uses to describe his designer suits and business cards. A woman is killed. The description is given the same narrative weight, the same sentence structure, the same detached specificity as a restaurant review. Vintage Books picked it up 48 hours later. In Queensland, Australia, it has been sold sealed in plastic, restricted to adults over 18, since the day it was published, and still is. The argument Ellis was making, that consumerism and psychopathy share the same emotional register, that 1980s Wall Street culture was indistinguishable from Patrick Bateman's inner life, was either a work of disturbing genius or an excuse to publish torture pornography dressed as satire. 1984, George Orwell, 1949 to present. George Orwell wrote the final draft, bedridden and dying of tuberculosis, on a remote Scottish island. He finished it in 1948, inverted the last 2 digits for the title, and died 7 months after publication. He did not live to see what the book became. Banned by the Soviet Union for being too accurate about the Soviet Union. Challenged in American schools for its sexual content, its anti-government themes, and, in some districts, for being labeled communist propaganda. The same book. Multiple contradictory reasons. 2 completely opposite political systems looked at it, and both said, "This is about us." They were both right. The passage that has outlasted every ban is from the interrogation scene near the end. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face, forever. Orwell wrote a state built on perpetual surveillance, rewritten history, mandatory loyalty, and a ministry of truth that made inconvenient facts disappear. The Soviets recognized themselves. The book remained banned until 1988. American school boards found different things to object to: Winston and Julia's relationship, the anti-authority framing, and in some districts the collectivist setting being misread as endorsement. Orwell didn't write a prediction. He wrote a warning. The fact that 2 completely opposite systems both tried to suppress it, for completely opposite reasons, is not a contradiction. It's the point. The warning wasn't about one system. It was about what any system becomes when it decides the truth is inconvenient. The Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie, published September 1988. By February 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini had issued a fatwa calling for Rushdie's execution. India had already banned it, weeks before the fatwa, under its Customs Act on public order grounds. 1 translator was killed, another was seriously wounded. Rushdie lived under formal police protection for 9 years. The specific passages that triggered the fatwa were dream sequences inside the mind of a mentally unstable character, in which a prophet figure receives revelation, and the novel raises the question of whether revelation is divine or a human construction, and in which a brothel's prostitutes take the names of the prophet's wives. Rushdie's defense was that these were a character's fractured dreams, not authorial declarations. The distinction was either not understood or deliberately ignored. By Rushdie's own account and multiple journalists reporting at the time, the fatwa appeared to have been issued without direct engagement with the text, though this has never been formally confirmed. In August 2022, 34 years after publication, Rushdie was stabbed on stage at a literary festival in New York. He lost sight in one eye and the use of one hand. His attacker was born 3 years after the sentence was handed down. He had encountered the fatwa before he had encountered the novel. The book was the secondary object. The sentence was the primary one. Every single one of these books survived. The governments that burned them, gone. The authors they tried to silence, immortal. Which one of these surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. I read every single comment.